Okay, kids, it's time to talk about cameras and gear, one of my favorite things to do. But I do want to preface this with the fact that this is not about teaching you how to use cameras. It's really about talking about product categories in terms of camera systems and how those might relate to you and creating your web series. There is a huge library on LinkedIn Learning where you can not only figure out how to choose the right camera for your production, but also how to use those cameras in what you are creating. So let's go ahead and start over here. The most cost-effective and also the entry point for a lot of people when it comes to creating content for the web, and that is of course a smartphone. And they have come a long way in terms of their capabilities. They're definitely better in low light than they used to be. They have a lot of apps available to them in terms of being able to dial in things like frame rate, and you can lock focus and exposure with them. And if you add something like this gimbal system that David and Sarah decided to get for their smartphone, then you can also create very dynamic movement with your camera system. And that was really important for them. They wanted to be able to move from space to space, and they wanted that energy in their footage. So they've added that to their kit, and it is actually quite cost effective to do that. Remember, if you're going to use a smartphone for your production, make it a dedicated device the day of when you're doing your production, and don't use it for things like answering your emails and checking websites and doing all of that stuff that we do with our smartphones. Use it as a camera when you are shooting your production. So moving from our smartphone category, we then move up to the next category of camera, which is really our mirrorless or our DSLR cameras. Definitely a bump up in terms of price point, but when you are getting serious about creating your web series, then this could be a great choice. In fact, this is the camera system that is going to be used to shoot the Underground Sun web series. And it's great in low light, it has great autofocus, and it also has the ability to have interchangeable lenses. And David and Sarah chose two lenses for their production. The first one here is a zoom lens, and this zoom lens is a 24-105. So it can see a lot of the world or just a little part of the world if they wanted to. It has autofocus to work with the autofocus system of their camera, and it also has image stabilization, so when they're shooting handheld, it will help with that a lot. This is probably going to be their go-to everyday lens for their production. The second lens that they chose is this 55mm lens, and it is what we call a fast lens, meaning that that aperture, that iris can open wide open, let lots of light into the lens, and it will give them that ability to get that really creamy, dreamy look, that shallow depth of field for their footage. This is probably going to be a great B-roll lens when they're shooting stuff having to do with going around the studio, close-ups of musicians, and that can translate to your B-roll as well, no matter what type of content you're creating. So the other thing that they decided to do, which is definitely something you could consider as well, is use the smartphone with this gimbal as their B camera, but they wanted to make sure that they had that same type of movement with their A or main camera system. So they invested in this gimbal system that they can use for that as well. They may also invest in wider lenses when they're using this in their productions. Now let's go ahead and talk about filters. And this is very important when you're using this type of product category of camera. When you go outside and there's tons of available light, one of the things you still want to be able to do with your camera system is get that shallow depth of field, that creamy look. And the best way to do that is by using what we call a neutral density filter. Now this is what we call a variable neutral density filter. And what it does is allow you to cut how much light is coming into your camera system. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, you want to do that because sometimes when we're outside, when there's tons of available light, we still want to be able to open up that lens, that aperture, so we can get that creamy, shallow depth of field, and that allows us to do it. Now, additionally, when we're talking about these cameras, sometimes we get flip up or flip out screens. This camera does not have one of those. So what they've done is they've decided to get an additional monitor, which they can use here. It's great for referencing the frames that you're setting up, especially in small crew productions. It'll also give you more surface area for composition and framing. And generally, nowadays, you can get monitors like this that are very bright, so you can use them outdoors as well. So third camera product category that I just want to briefly mention, and those are digital cinema cameras. And while this is definitely a big bump up in terms of price, when we take a camera system like this, which does have advantages in terms of size and portability, and we start building it up with lots of equipment, sometimes it makes more sense to go with a camera system like this, which has a lot of that stuff built into the camera. You can pull it right out of the bag and start shooting right away. And what do I mean by that? Well, cameras like this generally have built-in neutral density filters. They also have built-in professional audio inputs, and it takes time to build out a camera system like this and break it down, and having that advantage can sometimes make a lot of sense when you are creating content for your web series. Now, stability is a big thing. They want to move their cameras, and you may as well, and gimbal systems are great for that. But what if you want locked off shots? David and Sarah are oftentimes not going to be able to operate their cameras. So they're going to have themselves in the frame, both of them on camera, looking to the camera, and relying upon the autofocus system. Make sure you invest in a good quality tripod system when you are picking any of these product categories, and they make them for those smartphones as well. Now, last thing I want to talk about, and probably one of the most important, is powering your camera systems and making sure that you have enough battery power for them. It's very common that when people invest in a camera system that they'll buy the camera, it'll come with a charger and one battery, and they think that that's going to be enough. It's kind of like memory cards. You want to make sure you have backup memory cards for your camera system so that if you run out of space, you can put a new card in your camera. It's kind of the same thing with your batteries. If you don't have enough battery power when you're shooting, then that's the end of your production for that day, or at least a period of time. So make sure you invest in probably at least another charger and additional batteries for your camera system. Even if you're using something like a smartphone, make sure you bring a battery brick so that you can power or quickly charge up that camera system for your productions. So there you have it. Hopefully that gives you a good overview of different types of camera systems that you can consider for creating your web series. Don't forget, there's a huge library of content there in LinkedIn Learning that will help you not only choose, but also use these camera systems to create your web series.